And I'd like to give you all license to make fun of Director Powers. Director Powers for being tardy. His boss is here, so I'm sort of excited about that. Yes. I have the corrective action. Yeah, well, and Adam, if you would do the honors.
Chair Penner,
Present.
Mr. Diaz, Mr. Powers is running late. Mr. Groudon is absent today. Mr. Gore is also absent today. Ms. Perez,
Present.
Mr. Varela,
Present.
Mr. Ortola, here. Mr. Barranco, here. Mr. Mills,
Present.
Mr. Budnick,
Here.
and Mr. Steinhardt is absent today, and Ms. Tornor.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The absences of the board members have all been excused, and just as an aside, Sheriff Groudon, who is in Lassen County, called, and we gave him a snow day because apparently he said it was like the Nordic up there and that you couldn't see a thing. So we prefer him traveling safely. So he's never misses a meeting, and just as an aside, I think gets up about 3:30 in the morning to make the drive here on board days. So we're happy he stayed put. Turning now to, I'd like to announce the presence of Council Aaron McGuire and Executive Director Kathleen Howard, and the chair's report is minimal. We're going to release a couple of grants today. I think you'll hear plenty about those. I don't need to go into that. Executive Howard and I are going to LA towards the end of next week to look at a site that a Prop 47 grant was awarded to, and I will report back to you on that. At the end of the month, I'm heading to Solano County and Napa to do an opening of facilities. And so we're really excited, all positive heading into this year. People often ask, who will be remaining? Will the governor reappoint you? There has been no final word on any of that, although we're getting really good positive feedback from the new administration. We're super excited to still be here, and we think we're going to be here for a time to come, but we won't know that for certain for a while. And Katie, we haven't made enough fun of you about the executive director's report.
At least
generally,
not in 2019.
Yeah, 2000. Usually Tracy's gotten a few digs in for your 20-minute report, and we would like you to go as long as you like to start the new year off on a positive note.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the board. Good morning. I'm Katie Howard. I am hoping to move quickly through the executive director's report. We have a substantive agenda today with a lot of really wonderful presentations planned and information before the board today. So I will just provide a few updates. We did send an email around to the board last week when the governor released the budget on January 10th. And for the benefit of the audience members and those who may be listening online, I would just note two changes of note for the BSCC in the governor's budget. The governor proposed $9 million in ongoing funding for the CalVIP grant. That's the Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant. And so that was certainly very encouraging to hear. We'll begin moving through the legislative hearing process and all of that. But at least in terms of the governor's priority, funding for that ongoing was proposed. And then each year, as board members know, there is a determination made on the savings associated with Proposition 47. So our board approved a Prop 47 RFP in November. We were waiting to release that grant until we had the specific savings amount calculated. That came in a bit higher than last year, which is really beneficial to the grantees out in the field who really need the funding for those services. So the funding for 2019-20 is about $51 million. So as our grant goes out into the field, as you approve, there will be 2 years of savings used. And we have the approval from the Department of Finance to use that $51 million savings amount for 2019-20 as the estimate for the second year as well. So with the admin costs coming out of that amount, there will be roughly $100 million in grant funding available going out to the field very soon. So that's great. I have a couple of other grant related updates for you. in December of 2018, Congress, shortly before the government was shut down, did reauthorize the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, the JJDPA. There have been discussions in Congress for many years about reauthorizing that funding, and that's the source that funds our Title II juvenile justice grants here in California. There are a number of changes in that reauthorization, and a lot of the changes have to do with data collection efforts. So right now, Aaron, our general counsel, is going through a careful review of all of those new requirements, and we will keep you updated on those. The new changes become effective in October of 2019.
Katie, was that the one there was a name change on?
Yes, it's now been referred to, will be referred to as the Charles Grassley Act. So the outgoing chair of the Judiciary Committee was able to get his name associated with the funding. Meanwhile, we still have work in development on our Title II RFP with the funding that we have already received. We anticipate bringing an RFP to you for approval at the April board meeting. And then later on the information agenda, you will hear a report, which is one of the things that we like to do for the board and our interested members of the public here, a closeout summary of one of the grants that has wrapped up. So the Strengthening Law Enforcement and Community Relations Grant will be on your agenda today. And we will provide a similar summary to you at the April meeting on the Mentally Ill Offender Crime Reduction Act grant, MIOCR for short. The MIOCR grant summary will come at the April meeting. We have just finalized that legislative report, and it is posted to our website. I know there will be a lot of opportunity for thanks because you'll see a tremendous amount of work that has happened that's gone into the work on RFPs and grants, and there's a culmination of a huge project on training standards. But I just wanted to take a quick moment here to thank and acknowledge all of the BSCC staff at every level, particularly in the last 6 months since we got the responsibilities for the Youth Reinvestment Grant and the Adult Reentry Grant. As Linda can attest, it has truly been a huge amount of work and effort that I very, very much appreciate. So I just wanted to acknowledge the entire BSCC team for their extraordinary efforts. And then on a personal schedule note, I need to leave at noon today. I'm hoping our work will be done, but if it is not, please continue. Aaron will assume my role in my absence. And so I just wanted to make that note about my schedule. I want to incorporate the legislative update, which is at item 3 in your info, on your info tab. And then also just to point out to you, we did provide an update at an earlier meeting about the positive results on the audit of our Prop 47 funds from the first couple of years. We received the final report in December of 2018 from the State Controller's Office. We've included that as information. This is information you've already heard about, but it's just good for the board to see that the careful review by the State Controller's Office on how we administered those first couple years of the Prop 47 funds is included. So that concludes my report. Of course, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Anything from the board? Okay. We're going to move on to item 6 on the informational items. I'm going to invite Ricardo forward to do a brief summary of a closeout that we have on a grant.
Thank you. Well, good morning, Madam Chair and board members, as we get our technology all squared away. And again, Happy New Year. Again, my name is Ricardo Goodrich, field representative with the Corrections Planning and Grants Program Division. And very happy, very excited to give you this end of project summary for the Strengthening Law Enforcement and Community Relations Grant. So just by way of just some backdrop, just to kind of set the tone for this, in 2014, there were a series of controversial officer-involved shootings and racially charged events, from the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, to Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio, that were kind of prominently covered in the news. These events and several others reflected a growing sentiment that community police trust, there you go, was at a pretty low point, both nationally and as well as here. So the California legislature, recognizing that these events created an opportunity to bolster existing efforts and to encourage new efforts to build trust. And so within that framework, the Budget Act of 2015 allocated $6 million to the BSCC to provide grants to local law enforcement for programs and initiatives that were intended to strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. Now, funding could be used for a variety of efforts, and just some samples included training on implicit bias, assessing the state of law enforcement community relations, policing initiatives such as Operation Ceasefire, and a variety of restorative justice programs that were intended to address the needs of victims, offenders, and the community. And so, as you are all familiar with, the board appointed executive steering committee. There's a diverse 15-member committee that included representatives from community organizations, law enforcement, academia, as well as formerly incarcerated persons served on this committee. Now, the committee was co-chaired by former board member and retired police chief David Bejarano and Dr. BJ Davis, the executive director for Strategies for Change. So the process took some time, but from 2015 through 2016, the body gathered and they designed the RFP, the rating criteria, and provided funding recommendations to the board. So we'll kind of get into a bit more of the crux of what that entailed. So through the grant development process, the executive steering committee considered a lot of information. Staff provided them with several reports, and through a lot of healthy discussion, what we landed on as kind of a guiding tone was President Obama's report on 21st century policing. And what the committee found was that many of the principles outlined in the president's report were also aligned with the Budget Act of 2015. So specifically, items that spoke to training, crime reduction, and improving communication. So the president's report, and you can see them displayed on your screen, included 6 key areas, or what are called pillars, to improving community police relations. The actual report is pretty exhaustive, but for the purposes of today, I'll just provide a real high-level summary of each pillar and just kind of keep these in mind as we proceed through the rest of the presentation. So pillar 1, building trust and legitimacy. It spoke to law enforcement and communities building trust and establishing a culture of transparency and accountability. Pillar 2, policy and oversight, discussed the importance of policies that are informed and reflect community values. Pillar 3, the technology and social media, embrace the use of technology to pilot new approaches and engage and educate communities. Pillar 4, emphasize the equal role that communities and police have to keep neighborhoods safe. Pillar 5, officer training and education, reinforce the importance of providing law enforcement with education and training to deal with ever evolving challenges. And then the last pillar, officer safety and wellness, exactly what it sounds like, acknowledge that officer safety and mental health should be supported at all levels of law enforcement. So in terms of eligibility, police departments, sheriff departments, and cities that contract for law enforcement services were the primary applicants, but then there were some additional considerations. So law enforcement applicants were required to partner with one or more community partner in order to submit an application. Proposals were required to address Pillar 1, that was building trust and legitimacy, in addition to at least one other pillar. Individual applicants could request up to $600,000, and joint applicants could request up to $850,000. All applicants were required to provide a 20% match, and a minimum of 30% of the total grant award was required to be passed through to community partners. So what does that look like? And so again, the board received 43 proposals requesting more than $24 million. And you can see on the chart there the portions that are highlighted in yellow are the areas where funding was received, and we'll talk about that some more. But just to really, again, highlight it. So at the time, applicants were very engaging in sharing information. A lot of proposals spoke about historical practices, officer shortages, bad apples, and just other incidents that compromised public trust over the years. And so we found that it was just very personal for the applicants who had submitted these proposals. And that said, of the 6 million allocation, 5% was retained to actually administer the grant, which meant that 5.7 was actually allocated, and a total of 10 grants were provided to urban and rural law enforcement agencies. And so here you can see exactly how the allocation was broken out. So again, from the sheriff's office in Alameda, again, they're just listed somewhat alphabetically. Bakersfield Police Department, the sheriff's office, I'd like to highlight, we had some interesting partnerships, the joint application between Gonzales, Soledad, Greenfield, and King City, which is interesting because they're smaller police departments. Traditionally, it was their first chance to work together, and a lot of really good results. So again, just to kind of highlight, again, that's how the funding was broken out. So now I just want to take a second, just again, to give you a real high level summary of what some of the results show now that you've got the background. So for example, and I'll preface it by saying all 10 sites were required to do an end of project evaluation. There are several different ways to do it. Some of it's numerical, some of it's presented in other formats. So this particular chart that you're looking at here, the variable are in essence the responses to questions. The pretest mean, in essence, before services were provided, all the respondents completed questions and they were scored. The post-test then shows, again, same exact question, the results, and then the mean is the difference between the pre-test and the post-test. So just a few things to highlight. So again, we'll just go right to the bottom just to kind of draw your eye there where it says, I understand how police officers feel. And so this particular survey was of adult, I think there are about 45 to 50 individuals that responded to this prompt. And so you can see that there was a pretty big change in terms of their perception of law enforcement. And so there are several different kind of variations of these questions that pop up. And so then again, if you kind of look about in the middle, it says, in general, I feel safe around police officers. So kind of pre-test, when they were just coming in with whatever their kind of current experiences were. And then after spending some time, in this case, in Long Beach, they offered community police academies where it's a chance for people to come in. I attended them myself, say basically 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it's a day in the life of an officer that would be going through the academy, so to speak. It's obviously customized. It's a lot put into it, but again, it gives you an opportunity to see how there were some changes in attitudes and beliefs. And again, just kind of other things. This one's got a bit more text, so I'll read some of it out to you. But as with all of our approaches, applicants are required to list goals and objectives. And then obviously to the extent that we can get progress towards those goals and objectives, that's also super beneficial. So here you have Contra Costa County. And so one of their goals was to reduce crime, enhance safety by institutionalizing this relationship-based policing model. And so one of the things that they were able to report is that by the end of the grant, so again, this is a 2-year grant, the number of people who reported feeling unsafe decreased by 35%. This is really important to note. So in this particular area where services are provided, it's in a contained housing development area. It's not surrounded by a lot of opportunities that are easily accessible. And they were dealing with kind of generational history where residents just by their own admission didn't feel safe in their community, and it was difficult to envision being someplace else. And so what this particular project did is they went back to a more traditional kind of community-oriented policing approach for having officers walk the beat. But then they took it a lot further. It wasn't uncommon for the sheriff's office to knock on doors and help kids go to school, visit them at school during the day. So they really kind of went above and beyond to really build trust. And then a step further below, the city of Richmond, they talked about increasing their positive police practices. And so what they did is with the grant funds, they hired a citizen to be in what they call this police review authority position. And that individual was charged with not only reviewing policies and procedures, but he was present at meetings and he represented the community's voice. And he would go out, he would ask community members what they felt about certain things. And his role was to act as a liaison between the two. So again, they just took very kind of different and interesting approaches. And so again, there's a smattering of quotes, and you've got the full report, but just one of the large sentiments that came out, and again, this is 10 projects, but they spoke for the importance of having law enforcement just be more visible, and to the extent that it makes sense, just more friendly within their community environment, and how important that approach was for the younger generations that were coming up. And the survey responses above and beyond certainly reflected those sentiments as well. And so we'll end on the outcomes. So just in summary, the grant that the board funded certainly had a lot of positive benefits that came out of it. Between the mentorship programs, between there are countless stories of individuals who've reported just a new, different understanding of law enforcement, and as well on the other side, some of the law enforcement agencies were asked to pre and post testing about their own perceptions of the police environment. And they also provided results where they expressed that they had a different appreciation for how some community members felt. The longer term impacts obviously are going to be, exactly that. The challenge with the grant is just due to the length of it, it's going to take the evaluators a little bit longer time to fully, flesh out all the results. But based on the things that we do have preliminary, folks were very excited. And there were several requests, as you would imagine, for the board to find more money and for the legislature to find more money. But folks spoke very highly of it without prompting, be it youth, be it law enforcement, all the way up to the different police chiefs. And to this day, we still get calls, just cold calls from law enforcement agencies, just asking about the grant. So all that to say, we, at least as staff, we certainly appreciate the board's efforts that went into this 2 years ago. And again, you have a much more kind of comprehensive report there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Any questions of board members?
I have Madam Chair, I have a comment and a question. Actually, the pre and post tests, the improvements on every one of them, I think that's pretty impressive and a good start. I do have a question. I might be going too far back here in the RFP process. I see there are no Northern California counties or cities that received funding. I'm curious if there weren't applicants, or maybe the word's not getting out to the north, which I could probably help with, but I'm just curious, did Northern California cities apply? And
Absolutely, yeah. We certainly did have proposals, and unfortunately, at the time the RFP was released, and there was language in the RFP that said if we receive additional money, we would kind of keep going down the ranked list, and we just reached that point of exhaustion. And unfortunately, if they fell kind of below that cutoff point, it was more of a funding issue, not a quality issue, and so that's where they fell. Of course.
Supervisor Perez.
Well, thank you. Lots of leaders in Kern County still talking about the opportunity that was presented here and what has grown as a result of it. And what has started, right, that we know sometimes takes years, or sometimes the results are, right in front of us, but certainly seeds have been planted in a way I have not seen before. And certainly I've noticed that same commentary from others. I participated in some of the training as a member of the community and sat down and listened to members of law enforcement and members of the community. The community members in our particular instance were very established and respected grassroots leaders. And so there was some real tension at the tables, which I thought was just so cool, because the conversation is a tough one, obviously, and one in which we have to tirelessly improve for all of our benefit, obviously. But I was really stricken by the tension in the words used and the sort of tit for tat. But over the morning and into the afternoon, you could see that dissipate as folks were just getting to know each other. Eventually, we start talking about our kids and our neighborhoods and things that are totally commonly shared. And so I really want to say thank you, Ricardo, for giving Bakersfield an opportunity. We have unique challenges there. We're in the press a lot with our strained relationships. And so this is just such a material, positive move in the right direction. I witnessed it. I saw it. It was tough for everybody. But slowly but surely, you started to see an intimacy develop that is absolutely necessary in this process that we're not going to make progress without. So really, hats off. And I think that we are seeing real benefits of that. What that looks like and over how much time, we truly never know. right, in whatever posts we find ourselves in for whatever time.
And I'll just add to what you said, Supervisor Perez. One of the things that was great about, I had a chance to visit, I want to say either once or twice, was how strong the faith-based community
Mhm.
is
Oh, yeah.
in that area. And I think the first time I went out, I was surrounded by reps from all the different kind of faith-based organizations, and they talked about, because one of the first things we always talk about is when the grant leaves, what will you do to sustain it? And they talked about exactly what you said. We've got this culture here, and we're going to find a way to take tenets of this to work. And that was on day one of the grant. So I mean, it was very clear that between the law enforcement, the faith-based, and the non-faith-based organizations, that they were really going to try to find a way to make this work. And I think it bared itself out. So
And a great team within the BPD that I think is being creative and needs to be supported in that process and encouraged, and reaching out to folks that are very different in many ways. But it was really striking, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ricardo, for your investment into Bakersfield specifically. We certainly need the love, and there are good people there who are willing to make those connections with some help. Certainly makes that process smoother. So I'm really deeply grateful. Thank you.
Chief?
Thank you for your report on this. Has there been any thought about publishing some of these results in either local or national police chief magazines so that others might be able to replicate the successful projects that you felt anyway?
no, but good idea. I think we've got as far as we've encouraged all of the sites locally to certainly share all the information with their authorizing bodies, city council, county, whoever it may be. On our end, we're going to make that information public on our website, but it's a great idea to at least share it. Absolutely. Thank you.
And I'd actually like to take that one step further, Ricardo. I looked and I'm not seeing it, and you may have said it and I missed it, but is this going to the legislature? And is there a way to communicate out the successful nature of this? I mean, the hard copy report is really in-depth and tells a great story.
I will yield to our ED.
My recollection of legislatively handy on our own submitted
Yeah.
very few years ago.
It does seem helpful. And then in terms of sustainability, is that effort ongoing, or when this grant is over, is it end of day?
Well, I think we'll see, at least locally for the 10 sites, that variation. So the things that will cost the least amount of money will absolutely be sustained. But as you kind of alluded to, the grant funds certainly encourage that
Yeah.
stability.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
It's more of a comment, and just after reading the report, I'm trying to find a way on how to translate this valuable information from community custodial correctional setting. How this translates, just some of the questions that were asked of these law enforcement agents here, population that we care for, but also the families of the great study.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Ricardo. Appreciate all your hard work. Report's excellent, and we just need to market it a little bit. Chief Mills, I was thinking it may be something we could do on one of our trips to the association. Maybe share in some block of time. It'd be really good to do. So I think I'll take it on my next visit, and we'll shot that up a little better. Let the record reflect, Director Powers has arrived. Good to see you, Jerry. Moving on now to the consent items. Before I do that, I would remind any members of the audience, and I'm really happy to see so many people in the audience today, to please fill out a speaker's card and share it with Tracy or Adam if you wish to discuss or comment on any particular item on the agenda. If you don't have a particular item you're interested in, open mic, I guess, lack of a better way to say it, is allotted for at the end of this agenda. So I did invite you to do that. To the board members, this is being live streamed, so make sure your little green light's on. our sound system is so good now that if you're not speaking, I'd invite you to turn it off because it does pick up and you don't know your mic's on. So there's just a little tutorial on our fabulous technology. Agenda items A and B are on our consent agenda. I would invite any comment, question, or pulling the item from the agenda if anyone wishes to do so. Seeing none from the board, looking to the audience, does anybody wish to pull or comment on an item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, back to the board. I'm looking for a motion, a second, and a vote.
Second.
First, second, all in favor of moving the consent items forward, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries.
Madam Chair, I apologize. We jumped over the legal update. If we could return to that on the agenda, please.
Well, we didn't do that. I did that, but I appreciate you taking ownership. And Aaron, nothing personal. I was so distraught that Director Powers wasn't here.
We did have to wait.
Think
For
that-
sure.
We were worried about his
Remember that?
safety.
Remember when I was
weathered the
distraught
storm.
earlier? Sorry, Aaron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just very briefly, because we do have closed session on the agenda for today, but I did want to highlight a couple things. One is, if you've taken a look at your agenda, we do have 3 new RFPs that are going to go out to the field for grants. So if you haven't taken a look at that yet, please do. I do understand that we will have a couple of members recusing themselves as we bring up those RFPs. The eligible entities for those grants are cities and counties for the youth reinvestment grant, and then community-based organizations for the others. So just please, again, take a look at that before we get to those items. I also want to do a brief update on some of our federal grants in terms of the litigation. I did want to inform the board that we have, in fact, received or at least have available the Title II funding after some back and forth with our attorneys and the federal government. So that money is available. With respect to the fiscal year 2017 JAG money, we did get some responses back from the Bureau of Justice Assistance that we had to provide some additional technical information to them, but we expect to have that funding shortly now that that court order has been entered. And also the litigation is ongoing, and I just wanted to update you on the fiscal year 2018 JAG litigation, which is the motion for summary judgment by the Attorney General's office has been filed, and the hearing for the 2018 JAG litigation will be February 13th, and we'll continue to keep you updated on those items.
Thank you. And simply remind the board we will stay intact for a closed session after the meeting the formal agenda is completed. Any questions or comment on the legal report? Seeing none. Moving forward then to discussion items. On to item C, I'd invite Mary and Yvonne forward and to talk about the standards trainings for corrections, or STC as we like to call it here at the BSCC, because if we don't have a letter for it, what the heck?
Absolutely. Thank you. Agenda item C requests your approval of the recommendations of the Executive Steering Committee that was convened to revise the STC selection and training standards. The Standards and Training for Corrections Program, or STC, is responsible for setting and periodically updating the selection and training standards for local corrections professionals. And I know many of you are aware, but for those who aren't, when we talk about the corrections professionals, those standards apply to adult corrections officers, juvenile corrections officers, probation officers, and their supervisors and managers employed by our local sheriff's offices, probation departments, and police departments that operate jails. STC has been setting those selection and training standards for local correctional agencies since 1980. And by selection standards, I mean those tools that are used in the employment process, including exams and physical and medical screenings. And the training standards include training that is provided when one first is employed in a position, as well as training that is provided annually thereafter. At the end of 2014, STC completed a statewide job analysis that we presented to all of you that identified significant changes in the job since the last job analysis was completed. The results included changes that naturally occurs just in the job over time, as well as technology advancements that may have changed the job, and policy changes like public safety realignment, which changed the population of people serving time in jails, juvenile facilities, and on probation. One of the most significant areas of change that we've continued to talk about for corrections professionals was addressing the complex needs of an increased proportion of people with mental illness. These changes pointed to a need to re-examine how people are selected for corrections jobs and how they are trained. So in 2016, we requested the formation of an executive steering committee to review and revise the SCC selection and training standards to ensure that they are responsive to today's correctional environment. The work has been underway for about 2 years, and I am very happy to say that today we are requesting your approval of all of that work and the ESC recommendations. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mary Wakefield. She has been the lead on this project for the inception, really sort of the brilliance behind what you're about to hear. Yikes.
That's quite an intro.
Who said that there?
She's brought provisions with her, so she's
Yeah,
gonna.
I'm ready.
yeah.
It's a long project, so it's going to be a little bit long presentation. I hope not too long. But good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting the recommendations of the Executive Steering Committee, or as we call them, the ESC. But first, I'd like to familiarize you with some of the acronyms that I will be using. STC is the Standards and Training for Corrections Division of the BSCC. As Yvonne stated, we're responsible for setting selection and training standards for local corrections agencies. ACO is the acronym we use for adult corrections officers. The actual working title varies widely across the state, but generally speaking, these are the entry-level custody positions in our local jails. JCO is the acronym for Juvenile Corrections Officer. This is the entry-level custody position in our local juvenile facilities. And finally, PO is the acronym for probation officers. You'll see these acronyms quite a bit throughout this presentation. The ESC to revise this STC selection and training standards has met 4 times in the past, now going on 3 years. It was chaired by Probation Chief Mike Urtola, and I'd like to thank him very much for sticking with us all these years as we've been working on these standards. Included in the ESC was a variety of important perspectives, including sheriffs and probation chiefs and other administrators from local agencies that are directly impacted and responsible for implementing the standards. Training professionals from private industry and other state agencies, a mental health subject matter expert from a health foundation, human resources representatives, including an attorney specializing in employment law, as well as a representative from the community college system. As with all BSCC ESC meetings, these were public meetings open for all interested parties to attend. The ESC was charged with reviewing all of the STC selection and training standards. In their first meeting, they identified 3 standards that didn't require revision because they were appropriately delegated at the local level. This includes developing interview questions, setting a probationary period, and determining the minimum age for hire. All of the other standards were referred to work groups for further analysis. As you can see, there are a lot of standards to be reviewed by work groups and requires more work than there can be completed at once. So the ESC prioritized the selection exam and the entry-level core training revisions as first projects to be completed. And those are the top 2 in italics on the right of the slide. This report focuses on the core training revisions. The selection exam is still under development and will come before this board later this year for approval. Once we've completed these first 2 priority projects, we will begin work on the remaining standards. For clarification, when I talk about core training, I'm referring to the lengthy academy-style training that each ACO, JCO, and PO gets within 1 year of hire. There are 3 core training academies that are specific to the needs for each classification. In developing the work groups and project design, we established 3 guiding principles. First and foremost, we wanted to ensure that the project was legally defensible and compliant with the federal uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures. These guidelines are considered to be the legal standard for employee selection and are the legal and professional standards that STC must follow to ensure that our selection and training standards can withstand a legal challenge. Among other things, they require that all standards be job-related. For example, you can't require a driver's license for a job that doesn't require driving. Job relatedness is established through job analysis and consulting with those who perform the job and those who directly supervise them, since they are closest to the work and most knowledgeable about the requirements. So in forming our work groups, we paid close attention to ensuring that we kept this in mind. Second, we wanted to be sure that we set standards that are reasonable and operationally feasible. And finally, we wanted to ensure that the standards were responsive to stakeholder feedback and included best training practices. To address the job relatedness principle, we held 18 work groups with over 200 subject matter experts from local sheriff, police, and probation departments, representing 53 of the 58 counties. These work groups were responsible for reviewing all of the content. They looked at all the existing content, the results from the job analysis, and identified additions and reductions to content. They looked at over 600 performance objectives, rewrote them, reorganized them, identified overlaps across classifications, conducted job analyses, or gap analysis, I should say, identified testing requirements, and did an enormous amount of work to build 3 new entry-level core training academies and 6 transfer academies. The work group products were also vetted with the State Sheriff's Association and CPOC so that the administrators could assess operational feasibility. They were also reviewed by representatives from the network of providers that deliver core training to ensure they were logistically feasible. The guiding principle of responsiveness and best practices was addressed in a number of ways. The diversity of the ESC brought a lot of important perspectives to the conversation. We started the project with a customer satisfaction survey and brought those results forward for consideration. In addition to representation of the ESC from CDCR, we also consulted with our correctional training partners, POST, and the California Highway Patrol. And in those areas that required a special expertise like behavioral health and defensive tactics, we brought in experts from the field to help us. Incorporating all of the guiding principles, the work groups conducted a comprehensive and holistic review of all 3 core training academies. They didn't just add hours to training. Every word was analyzed and content was added, deleted, and revised. It's important to note that the STC standards do not include full content. To account for all of the variances in local policies and procedures, our training standards define topic, classes, performance objectives, instructional time, and testing. The content is filled in by the training provider. During this review, the work groups also identified areas of overlap in training to help design transfer academies for people transferring between the 3 correctional classifications. There were several factors that drove reductions or increases in time and content. In some cases, we received feedback that there was too much time spent on a specific topic in our current core, so those class times were reduced. In other cases, we heard there was a large variance in local policies and procedures that precluded the content area to be covered adequately in core. They were more agency specific. An example of this is emergency procedures, where many agencies have widely varying policies regarding the use of self-contained breathing apparatus, fire extinguishers, and/or fire hoses in conformance with their county fire codes. So performance objectives requiring the use and practice of this equipment was removed with a notation that agencies should train their staff on their agency-specific equipment and procedures. Lastly, subject matter experts reorganized performance objectives to combine and condense classes in order to reduce redundancy. An example of this is the topic booking, receiving, and releasing. These trainings used to be spread throughout core, which resulted in repetition. The work group combined all of the booking, receiving, and releasing training into one topical training module which resulted in a reduction of time. All three of these factors contributed to a significant reduction in the report writing topic. The current core includes classes on writing and grammar, but you can't teach someone to write in an 8-hour class. It's something that must come to the job with the ability to write at the appropriate level. It's more of a selection issue than a training issue. So the work groups recommended removing the writing clinics and addressing the issue of written competency through the selection exam. Therefore, the current revision of the selection exam will include writing skills evaluation. The revised core emphasizes job-specific report writing and some proofreading and eliminates training on writing mechanics. In some topical areas, work groups recommended increasing hours. The two main reasons for increasing hours were where gaps in training were identified from the job analysis process. Examples of this are the addition of classes on gender identity and sexual assault prevention. The second reason was an increased emphasis on a topic. The job analysis identified several areas where related tasks are being performed more frequently and are more important than ever to successful job performance. Examples include behavioral health and medical. So the result of all this hard work is the list of changes that you see on this slide. I'm going to talk about each one of them on the following slides, but just wanted to show you the overview that we have new content and revisions throughout. We significantly expanded behavioral health training. We have greater delivery flexibility by following a prerequisite model, greater flexibility for defensive tactics training. We have transfer academies, and we have a tool to reinforce core training on the job. One of the changes to core training is the addition of new classes. The new core will have classes on sexual assault and abuse, gender identity, social media, evidence-based practices, and significantly expanded behavioral health training. I'd like to note here that the Sexual Assault and Abuse class is aligned with the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act training guidelines, and the evidence-based practice class already exists in PO Core. It's only being added to ACO and JCO. One of the biggest areas of change identified through the job analysis and further supported by nearly everyone who participated in our revision process was the need for better and more behavioral health training. As a result, we established a work group of behavioral health experts to help us identify what training was needed to fill that gap. This included behavioral health professionals and practitioners, academia, agency representatives, county mental health, and partner agencies with behavioral health training, including CHP, POST, and CDCR. The work group developed a comprehensive set of recommendations for a significant expansion of behavioral health training, including new classes in the topics listed here on this slide. You can find a list of what is covered in each of the classes in the behavioral health in attachment C-5 in your book. In addition to the inclusion of training to help officers address the mental health needs of those under their care, they also included training to help officers with their own mental health needs, which is often overlooked. This new unit includes nearly 24 hours of behavioral health specific training. The work group also spent a lot of time discussing the need for standardization in training across the state. They recommended that BSCC develop the full content, including lesson plans, participant workbooks, instructional aids and exercises, and test questions. As reported previously, we've contracted with the University of Colorado to design the curricula, and the work group continues to participate in reviewing the materials. This is the first time that the BSCC has developed curricula for any portion of core, and we will make it available to all training providers free of charge. It can also be used outside of core if agencies want to train other officers. Currently, all core academies are set up in a structured order. In order to provide more flexibility to providers, the work group was instructed to review topics and classes, more like college curricula, and identify only those classes or topics that are a required learning foundation before another class or topic. As you can see from this slide, topics and classes can now be taught in any order except for the 6 prerequisites shown here. Another change is a more flexible time requirement for defensive tactics training. The current core requires a set amount of time for defensive tactics classes. However, most agencies bring in extra instructors to assist and are able to complete the training with time to spare. So they would stretch the class out unnecessarily in order to meet the standard. In order to address that problem, the work group developed time requirements based on a student to instructor ratio of 8:1. If you have more instructors, you can teach the class in less time. If you have less instructors, you can teach the class in more time. Now the class can be as long or as short as needed to sufficiently instruct and practice the moves and pass the behavior skills tests. Another change is the development of a tool to bridge the gap between core training and on-the-job performance. This idea came from the customer satisfaction survey, where supervisors said they wanted a way to help them reinforce core training when the student comes back on the job. As a result, the work groups identified the core concepts that should be reinforced on the job and designed a format for supervisors to do so. This is an optional tool and has been designed so that agencies can add their agency-specific training if they'd like to. A sample of this form can be found in attachment C-4. One of the most exciting changes to core training is the addition of transfer academies. The job analysis identified significant overlap in the tasks performed by the ACO, JCO, and PO classifications. This provided the support for shorter academies for anyone who's completed a full academy and then transfers to one of the other classifications. So work groups compared core content between classifications and designed these transfer academies. As you can see on this slide, the first 4 are all instructor-led academies of less than 2 weeks. This will result in time and cost savings for agencies when transfers occur. It's particularly helpful for probation departments, since many of the probation officer hires are from juvenile corrections officer classifications. For transfers between the ACO and JCO, due to the large similarity in job functions, the hours are less than 2 days. Because of this, the work group designed on-the-job training to accomplish these transfers. When an agency requests, STC will supply all of the on-the-job training materials and testing necessary to train these transfers on the job. You can find the topics and classes and hours for all of the transfer academies in attachment C-3. So all this translates to a change in the number of total hours of core training for each of the classifications. Remember that holistic review we talked about? Well, this is where that comes into play. The increases and decreases in the cores are the net changes in red on this slide. The work groups just didn't add hours. For example, the JCO core includes over 56 hours of new content, but with other reductions, the actual net increase is only 8 hours. This concept applies to all of the cores. The outlines of the topics and classes for each core can be found in your packet as attachment C-2. In summary, the new core training for JCO is 68 hours, a net increase of 8 hours. For PO, the new core training is 189 hours, a net decrease of 7 hours. The PO core is the only one that was reduced, and although it also includes a lot of new content, it is one of the more recent cores and already included some of the new material. It was also significantly reorganized, which resulted in redundancy removal. That's why we see the reduction. The ACO core training is 187 hours, an increase of 11 hours. And the ACO supplemental core is 79 hours. That's an increase of 23 hours. This core program had the biggest net gain. The supplemental core is for sheriff's deputies that have already completed post-training. The large increase is mostly attributed to the increased emphasis on behavioral health, medical, and supervision responsibilities in a custody setting that are not covered in post. STC regulations identify the number of hours of each core training program. So in order to implement the ESC recommendations, the regulations must be revised. STC has drafted a proposed regulation revision for the core academy hour changes and the new transfer academies, and a copy of the proposed regulation revision package is in attachment C-6. The ESC recommends an effective date of July 1st, 2020. This allows core providers 18 months to make the necessary revisions to the core curricula and testing. If a provider completes all lesson plans before July 2020, they can implement the new training. During this time, STC will provide technical assistance and training to assist in the development of the new course. So today we are requesting your approval to implement the ESC recommendations as discussed. You'll find the specific recommendations on page 2 of your agenda item. It includes approval of revised core training, new transfer academies, optional core reinforcement training guidelines, behavioral health lesson plan development, and initiation of the reg revision process. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Yvonne.
Thank you, Mary. And I'd also just like to join Mary in thanking Chief Ortola for his leadership throughout this very long and complex project. It really was a massive undertaking, and you stuck with us through all of those twists and turns, and we really do thank you for that. I'd also like to say thank you to the STC team, and Mary in particular, who served as the lead in trying to keep all of us organized and on track. This project really consumed our team over these last 2 years, and they really rose to that challenge. And my last thank you is to the hundreds of people who participated in the work groups. What is before you today was truly a community effort.
Thank you. I'm going to begin with my thank you. As you can see after the presentation from Mary and Yvonne today, this is a heavy lift, and it truly goes to the core of what happens at the BSCC. Both Mary and Yvonne were able to go out and vet this process with the various associations, and certainly there was pushback and an exchange there. What they are not saying on their agenda is about the internal pushback and the exchanges that went on prior to even going out into the community. The hundreds of people that were involved with this, the extreme knowledge base that contributed to this are all a tribute to your team and to both of you specifically. To Mike Rottola, who worked with us at the BSCC, but then also goes back to the chief probation officers and vets the information. Not a simple task either. We didn't approach the sheriffs or the chiefs one time each. It was a couple of events, and to their credit, eventually we moved to where we are today. Reckoning with the fact and hearkening back to when I was a chief probation officer, when you begin to add to any core training, certainly we all know we want that knowledge base out there, and I think the product we have illustrates that. There's also financial impacts when you begin to add or subtract, and all of those were taken into account. I think we did not mention today that, you know, we have some funding that we think will help us move towards the greater use of technology as we roll training out, and also to be able, we did talk about to be able to provide some core emphasis that we would develop for our stakeholders. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you did. It's truly a labor. We tease Yvonne about how much she loves training. So now I'm embarrassed I did that because it really represents
I'll remind you.
all that we do. Yeah, I'm not embarrassed about teasing Director Powers, but I feel bad about what I've done to you. With that said, I'd open it now to the board, and then we'll open it to the public for any comments, questions, praise. They'll take all of that today.
So, Madam Chair, I have a few comments. First off, I'd like to acknowledge that it was a very complex issue. Might not be the most glamorous issue that comes in front of the board here, but vital to community corrections in California. Big thank you to the ESC, a very diverse and knowledgeable group. I learned a lot working with those people, and we'll continue to move forward with that executive steering committee. Thank you again to the correction staff. I counted 222 staff. I don't know if that's the exact number, but it's a lot of staff around the state that worked on these work groups. But again, a special thank you to Vaughn, Mary, and Joyce. I don't know if Joyce is here or not.
I think the whole STC.
And the whole
team practically
STC,
is
the
here.
STC staff, a lot of work went into this. I joke with Yvonne saying that it was promised it was going to be a 2-year project. It's turned into about 3.5 years, and we got more to go. So it means I can't retire yet, so I have to keep going. So that's probably a good thing. The two things I think that came out of this were really crucial were the transfer academies. It's going to help ACOs and JCOs, it's going to help departments around the state to save money and also to move their staff forward and hopefully recruit from within. And then the behavioral health model is huge. I think it's
Huge.
crucial to state of California for these young employees to get this type of training right out of the chute and train our people right. And then also looking forward to CPOC and BSCC working on some of those static curriculums, online trainings and things like that, which would only improve these core trainings. So again, thank you to Yvonne and all your staff. Thank you. It was been a great experience.
Anyone else from the board? Any members of the public wish to comment on this item? All right. I then would move back to the board for a motion, a second, and a vote on the recommendations before the board.
Can I make one comment, Chair, please? And
Yes.
I'd like to move staff's recommendation. I would love to be kept abreast of any anecdotal information you're hearing from the institutions and other affected individuals as to changes and, what we're seeing culturally. I was really, really stricken locally by the testimony from corrections officers and nonprofits that are working within a prison institution in Kern County to connect folks there with training of animals. We know this has incredible life skills and soft skills associated with this particular, type of intimacy. And the impact to the guards and the anecdotal stuff we're getting back is really powerful, that how the environment seems to have changed with some insight about what could be important to inmates that are, leaving soon, and new opportunities can arise as a result of these relationships. Just that the power of that infusion into that relationship that's normally very strained is proving to have all kinds of effects, positive effects, clean area, less drug paraphernalia, tortilla chip wrappers, or, whatever you would normally see as part of the cultural environment seems to be being positively affected by, a greater emphasis in the well-being of everyone there, right? Scared guards and hopeless inmates, right? I mean, it's such an important thing to improve on. And so I would love to hear back, and I'll continue to share with you what I'm learning on the ground. I'm a big doggy person, and we've implemented some real cool stuff on the ground to improve the, that relationship in ways that is creative. But it's having all these other impacts that are good for the institutions, good for the safety of the officers, good for the well-being of the inmates, and which I think is just such a win-win. So I'd be curious to hear, how the training and insight into other people's worlds, be it a gender identity issue or trauma-informed stuff that I think we all need to get better at doing. It's very hopeful, and I appreciate your hard work.
We'll be happy to do that. We will be tracking the implementation of the new standards and their impact in the field. So we're happy to come back. And
Great, thank you. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Supervisor Perez, did I hear that as a motion and a comment?
Yes, thank you.
All right. We have a second, motion second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries, and thank you. Moving on to agenda item D.
And before we begin this item, Madam Chair, I would look to Mr. Budnick, I believe, is going to recuse himself from this item in which community-based organizations will be eligible to apply for direct grant funding.
Great. Any,
I don't believe for this one, Board Member Perez. I think the next item in which counties will be eligible to apply um, will be the one you'd want to recuse yourself from.
great. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Colleen Stoner, and I'm presenting Agenda Item D. This agenda item requests approval for the release of the request for proposals for the Adult Entry Grant Program. Senate Bill 840, Budget Act of 2018, established the Adult Reentry Grant Program on June 14, 2018, and appropriated $50 million in funding. The Board of State and Community Corrections is to award the funding through a competitive bid process to community-based organizations to support people who were formerly incarcerated in state prison. Of the $50 million, $25 million is to be allocated for rental assistance, $15 million for the rehabilitation of existing property or buildings for housing people released from prison, $9.35 million is to support the warm handoff and reentry of people transitioning from prison to the community. $150,000 is to support the Berkeley Underground Scholars Initiative, and $500,000 is to go to the BSCC for costs to administer the program and to report on program outcomes. At the July 12th, 2018 board meeting, the board approved the use of this funding and authorized the Executive Steering Committee to oversee the development of the request for proposal process. The board appointed Board Chair Penner and Board Member Torner as co-chairs and delegated authority to the co-chairs to work with staff to establish the Executive Steering Committee with relevant subject matter expertise. To assist in the recruitment of the Executive Steering Committee membership, an invitation for statements of interest in the Executive Steering Committee was posted to the BSCC website. This was used to develop a finalized membership list. You can see attachment D2 for a list of the Executive Steering Committee members. The Executive Steering Committee convened 3 times during the month of October and November to develop the proposed program design, the application requirements, the technical components, and the rating criteria contained in the request for proposal, which is attachment D3. As we began this project, we learned that the Adult Reentry Grant Program is subject to the provisions found in Welfare and Institutions Code sections 8255 through 8257. This section of the Welfare and Institutions Code require a state agency that administers a program providing housing or housing-related services to the homeless or people at risk of being homeless to incorporate the core components of the Housing First model in their proposed program design. Housing First is an evidence-based model that centers on providing or connecting homeless people to permanent housing as quickly as possible. Housing First providers offer services as needed and requested on a voluntary basis and do not make housing contingent on participation in services. In a Housing First program, clients are not required to participate in services to access or retain housing. Housing First programs remove barriers to accessing housing and do not require sobriety or an absence of criminal history. The grantees that provide housing-related services funded by the Adult Reentry Grant Program will be expected to implement a Housing First model to the extent that it applies to the specific services they propose. During the Executive Steering Committee process, a number of policy and legal and programmatic requirements and responsibilities emerged to the state that are related to state housing laws and regulations that are new to the Board of State and Community Corrections. One component of the program, the rehabilitation of existing property and buildings, is particularly impacted by the state housing laws and regulations. And this will need further evaluation and research to determine how best to respond to these potential responsibilities and compliance issues. In light of the rehab of existing property and buildings component, um, and the concerns that we have, it is not included in the request for proposals before you. However, to keep the project moving forward, the Executive Steering Committee completed their work on the development of a request for proposal with the other two components of the Adult Reentry Grant Program. Those components are the rental assistance and the warm handoff and reentry services. In this slide, you can see that in the category of rental assistance, there was 25 million allocated to that category or to that component, and eligible applicants may request up to $3 million for the entire grant period, which is 42 months. Under the warm handoff and reentry services component, there was 9,350,000 allocated, and up to 500,000 may be applied for by applicants for the entire grant period. I've already mentioned that eligible applicants are community-based organizations, but the Executive Steering Committee further defined that to be organizations located in California that have a 501c3 status. In other words, they're nonprofits. And they may submit a proposal for one or both of the two program components. Here are some examples of both of services found in both of the components. Under rental assistance, services and activities may include, but they're certainly not limited to, short-term emergency housing assistance, landlord incentives, permanent supportive housing, rent subsidies, transitional housing, stipends, vouchers, moving costs, credit repair. Under warm handoff and reentry services, activities and grant-related activities might include, but are not limited to, reach-in services, case management services, transportation, food, emergency services, employment, vocational, social service, behavioral health care, mentors, transitional services, and housing and system navigation. Pending approval by the board for the release of this request for proposal, it will be released tomorrow, January 18th, 2019, to the field. Proposals will be due back to the Board of State and Community Corrections on March 25th, 2019. Then the award recommendations will come back to all of you in July. And the grant awards will be for 3 years, 7 months, from August 1st, 2019 to February 28th, 2023. This concludes my report, and pending any questions, the staff recommends the board approve and release the Adult Reentry Grant RFP as recommended by the Executive Steering Committee.
Thank you, Colleen. And yet again, another thank you for incredibly hard work on a very difficult subject matter that's so meaningful out in the field. And I'd ask my co-chair, Francine, to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just have a few brief comments. I would like to thank you personally for asking me to be a part of this dynamic duo. That's the two of us. You know how I feel about you. I won't mention it again publicly, but it was an amazing experience. This was my second ESC. I'm always just surprised and like really thankful to have those experiences and learning so much and being a new board member and working next to under Linda is always great. And the insight of Senator Skinner to even bring this forward and recognize the fact that in order to reduce recidivism, there is a very sensitive group of people where homelessness, if it's not stable, you almost can't even start the fight of even dealing with that. So for her to realize that, the hard work of the ESC and staff, I think that we captured everything that she was hoping for us to capture with this RFP process. And there are a lot of hours and days and even new understanding, because quite typically, the only other ESC I was on, it was subject matter experts, but not the real grassroots organizations that received the money. And this one was a little bit different in that way. So to hear from the people who typically would receive the money and have to try and work on it, it was eye-opening. So once again, thank you to staff and to Linda for allowing me to be there next to her. All right, that's it.
Any other members of the board like to comment on this item?
Not a comment, but a question. Does the state prison, does this proposal, does it include 1170H cases? Local prison?
No, it's state prison.
Only state prison. Was there a conversation around?
This
including
was
that?
mandated through the
It
legislation.
was, yeah. Okay, thank you.
That's the nicest no he's heard in a long time. Any other members of the board?
I have a question. So in the uh, divvying up the 50 million, could you walk into the methodology, and it don't have to be in depth, on how we came to the amounts of 25, 15, 9 for the 5 different,
That's an easy answer.
Categories.
Also, it was
Yeah.
mandated in the legislation.
easy enough?
Anything? No? Anybody in the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, yes. Come on up, Raymond. You don't have a speaker's card, but I'm over it.
Been, well, excuse me, 2 years since I first came here. I had recently came out of prison after serving 26 years, and I spoke to y'all and received a card from Mrs. Perez. Still have that, and I was moved by everything that happened when I first came home after serving 26 years. Went home going in as a juvenile. Came here to speak on Prop 57. I'm back 2 years to just kind of uplift the adult reentry thing. Oftentimes, a lot of these reentry for adult cases don't really help some of the lifers coming home. As a lifer, after serving 26 years, there was no housing, there was no job opportunities, there wasn't anything out there but for what the community-based organizations offered me. And so I would just like to just uplift this reentry to also help to cover some of the lifers that are coming home, because there's a lot of lifers that are now coming home because of laws that were passed and pushed through, and so many nonprofit organizations have fought for. And so I just want to just uplift this and thank the BSCs for really like supporting all the things that we do and bring up here, and for really motivating me to stay on track and to do the right thing, and really believing in people like myself that have come home after serving so many years in the system, and now are trying to come home to look for a new start. And like I said, it was a blessing when I came here. I was moved, never thought I would have this opportunity to come here. Never even thought that I would be home. But was blessed because of laws that were passed to get me here. So I just want to thank you guys for that, and just really how we can just support so many lifers that are coming home, because that's where the recidivism is the lowest at. So less than 1% for lifers to return home. And in our county, we also reduced crime by 40%. In 2017, we had 55 murders. 2018, we had 33 murders. So it's declining, even though a lot of lifers are now coming home. People are scared. Oh, lifers are coming home. They're frightened. No, we are the ones that are less likely to commit crimes and be more productive citizens in our communities. So, yes, San Joaquin County, Stockton.
Say something, Chair?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. It is so nice to see you. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
And I'm just so happy to see that you're doing well. It's amazing how the time flies. I have a whole host of foster siblings I was raised with. And 2 of them, Rebecca and Robert, Rebecca my age, Robert a couple years younger than her. Their father was sentenced to life when Robert was, I think, a year, and Rebecca was about 5 or 6. And they lived with us, and we're still quite close. But their father came home a week ago, or was released a week ago after 37 years. And he has been released. He's doing a 6-month program in San Francisco, and then back to Bakersfield. And I'm going to make sure that he has opportunities and hopefully gets connected to people like you. But I just want to say thank you for what you've done for highlighting the specific and unique characteristics of our lifer situation in California. I think it presents some exciting opportunities. And in particular, your involvement with young people and avoiding this whole thing to begin with, right? For so many people who, with just a little direction, would never find themselves in such horror, frankly. And so 37 years, he's out. I saw a picture of him with the family in a parking lot, and they sent it to me pretty exciting. It was just shocking. I don't think Robert has ever physically seen him, out of custody. So it's pretty incredible stuff, and your work is paying off in many ways to people like, their father, who has a long road ahead of him, as you know. But thank you for what you're doing, continuing to, raise the standard and the way in which we can do better as a society. So hats off to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember Mr. Budnick had asked, what is it that you want, that you see yourself doing now that you came home? And I had told him I would like to be the person making the decisions to where the money is allocated, because who knows better than I do, right? Where I'm coming from.
Everybody wants that job.
Yeah, and now I have an opportunity. Now I'm working actually in the DJJ, the Department of Juvenile Justice. I go to Youth Authority twice a week. I present in there, and I also go to juvenile hall, and I also mentor in schools. So I'm very busy, really sharing my experiences and helping a lot of younger folks, and really just trying to help prevent younger people to go to prison for life. Thank you
Great.
guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think are you coming forward? All right.
Good morning, board members. So my name is Andre Balian. I'm formerly incarcerated, but I'm not here to talk about me specifically. I'm here to talk about the work that's being done, and why AB 109 has been a benefit to the community and county in which I live, which is San Joaquin County. I said I'm formerly incarcerated. I was AB 109. I was referred by probation to Fathers and Families of San Joaquin. They helped me get my life back on track, as well as probation. I want to lift up Chief James, that's our head probation officer in San Joaquin County, who's the head of probation in San Joaquin County. In the last 3 out of 4 years, we have had the lowest recidivism rate in the state. We dropped crime rate by 40%. I say we because it takes a collective of individuals to do what needs to be done. AB 109 helped me return to school. I earned 5 clerical certificates. I'm off probation. I'm now a case manager doing the very work that helped me change my life around. This life change would have never been possible had it not been for the efforts of probation and the reentry work being done in San Joaquin County by nonprofits. These funds allocated to these counties doing this work are vital to our society if we truly plan to continue to reduce the recidivism rate and restore positive values with the formerly incarcerated. We are not just fathers. We're not just felons, we're fathers. They're not just prisoners, they're people. People who may have never had an opportunity to change. AB 109 is that change. I am that change. Chief James and the efforts put forth by her department is that change. You all here are that change. And I just want to say thank you, for giving me the opportunity to change my life. Like, I would have never, known how to represent myself and represent my community, as a man. And so I leave you with this quote by Martin Luther King. It says, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." And I leave you with that quote specifically because I was comfortable in my misery of not being a law-abiding citizen. It was not until I was given the opportunity to change and challenge my worth did I understand that I could make a positive difference in my community and help guide others who are seeking positive change as well.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, this is not another day at the office. I really, really appreciate the last 2 speakers. It's inspirational for the work that we do here, and it is supports the right way to do business. And I think we're seeing, that incremental change occur, and you guys can help us continue that work. So I appreciate that. Anybody else on the board? Scott's not in here for the one thing Scott would really, we'll have to let him watch it later on the live stream, but really impressive comments.
Madam Chair, I would just like to thank the last 2 speakers. Having worked in this prison system for going on 29 years now, the hope that the recent legislative changes and the voters have agreed that we need to do something different with our prison system. And just your message, if I could bottle that and take it to the 35 institutions to talk to our wardens and care providers and the population, it's so inspirational. So I had a bad day yesterday. You just made my day better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else from the board? Okay. Thank you to the public, and I now look to the board for a motion and a second.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Let the record reflect. Mr. Budnick's out in the hallway. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now for the difficult job, somebody go get Mr. Budnick.
I'm going to recuse. I can grab it.
Okay,
I'm
there
going
you
out,
go.
right? If you could just note for the record.
Yes.
Yeah, at this time, Madam Chair, I would ask anyone else interested in either for their department to apply for this funds or might have a financial interest in this next grant to recuse themselves. Chief Mills was looking at me for a second. I'm not sure whether or not you're not going to apply.
All right.
Chief Rotolo, you're okay? All right.
So item E. There you go.
Right. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Kimberly Bouchard. I'm a field representative in the Corrections Planning and Grant Programs Division. And I'm here today for agenda item E, requesting your approval for the request for proposals developed out of a series of meetings held by the Executive Steering Committee established for the Youth Reinvestment Grant. The ESC was co-chaired by David Steinhardt and Probation Chief Mark Varela, and it also included 12 other members from various disciplines and counties. If you're interested in seeing the full roster for that ESC, you can find that in your binders as attachment E2. A tremendous contribution in time and effort was made by these 14 ESC members, and I'm honored to present the product of their hard work to you today. I have a short PowerPoint presentation that will provide a basic overview of the grant program and the parameters of the request for proposals. So looking at this first slide here, we see kind of the basic setup for this grant. The Youth Reinvestment Grant Program was established last summer as part of the budget negotiations, and a total of $37.3 million was provided for this program. That amount is broken into 3 separate components. There's a set aside for Indian tribes to be able to provide diversion services for Indian children. And the amount for that is roughly, well, it's 3% of the total grant funding, which is roughly 1.1 million. We're going to be talking more specifically about that component in the next agenda item. The next component for the YRG grant is the administrative component. And again, we see 3% or about 1.1 million set aside for that. So that will cover all of the BSCC's costs for implementation and oversight of this grant, and will also cover the cost for a statewide evaluation of the grant. And then we have the vast majority of the funding for this grant is going to support a statewide diversion program for minors. So we have about 35.1 million for that effort. And the legislation directs that these interventions that are funded through the Youth Reinvestment Grant be trauma-informed, evidence-based, culturally relevant, and developmentally appropriate. We just skipped a slide. Okay, so with this grant, we're looking at eligible applicants being the California, all the cities and counties within California. And then, do I need to pause for a minute?
No, Mr. Budnick is recusing himself from this item as well.
Okay. Okay, so again, eligible applicants for this grant are the cities and counties in California, but then sort of a unique structure with this funding stream in that we have the applicant then being asked to designate a lead public agency. That public agency in each jurisdiction would receive 10% of the grant award and would be responsible at a local level for coordinating the grant activities. And then also the city and county, any local jurisdiction awarded funding under this grant would be required to select community-based organizations that would receive 90% of the funding to actually support the delivery of diversion services to minors. We have, for each of these grants, we're looking at a maximum amount of $1 million. And there's also a minimum, it's not on this slide, but it's $50,000. So for any one application, that's the minimum and maximum that can be requested. However, cities and counties that apply are allowed to submit multiple applications. And because the legislation specifically invites regional approaches, one or more of those applications could be in combination with another jurisdiction for a regional approach. The Youth Reinvestment Grant generally requires a 25% match for grantees. However, it does specifically provide an exception to that for local jurisdictions that have a high need combined with little or no infrastructure. And in that case, the jurisdiction could indicate to us in their application that they are requesting a 10% match. The grant cycle for this grant is 3 years and 8 months. So we're looking at beginning these new grants July 1st of this year and running through February 28th of 2023. With this grant fund, we had the opportunity to hear directly from the author's office. And one of the things that they expressed to us was their strong desire in seeing these funds get out to small and rural communities. So in light of that, the ESC looked at that and had a lengthy discussion about how best to ensure an equitable distribution of these funds across the state. And the model that they developed provides for small counties and the cities within those counties to compete exclusively with other small counties and the cities within those counties for a total of 20% of the grant funding. That's a little over $7 million. And then similarly, medium counties and the cities within those medium counties would compete only with the other medium counties and their cities for another 20%. And in turn, the large counties then would be competing with other large counties and their cities for 20%. So we have there a total of 60% of the funding that's going to be divided up equally between small, medium, and large counties and their cities. But then the ESC was also concerned about ensuring that we recognize and award funding to the highest rated proposals, regardless of where their projects might be located. So the remaining 40% of the funds will be awarded to the highest rated proposals that weren't already funded as we went through that small, medium, and large designation. So then looking at what is this YRG all about? Who are we actually trying to fund here and get the services to? So the Youth Reinvestment Grant is looking to primarily divert youth from entering the juvenile justice system, and secondarily to prevent further involvement in the justice system for kids who may have already had some contact. So the idea is to focus these efforts on youth who are under the age of 18, who are in underserved communities, and especially those areas with few or no existing diversion options, and to focus the efforts in communities where there are high rates of juvenile arrests and high rates of racial and ethnic disparities. One final consideration here, the ESC, in looking at the high need and limited resources available for tribal communities, opted to assign preference points that will be awarded to those proposals that specifically incorporate diversion services for Indian children. So that is the end of the slideshow. And, I hope that in addition to the information that was in your agenda report, that short presentation gives you an idea of what's included in the RFP and how this youth reinvestment grant is shaping up. I do want to draw your attention to one thing. You should all have a goldenrod sheet in your packets there. And so when you look at the copy of the RFP that's in your binders, there is one small change on page 4 where we have the eligible applicants identified, and it shows cities and counties. We're actually looking to change the language to what you have on the golden sheet so that it's more clear to anyone who's reading the reading the RFP what we actually mean when we say cities and counties are the eligible applicants for this. Okay. So today I am asking for your approval for the request for proposals as presented by the ESC, as well as your approval to release this RFP to the field. And I'm happy to respond to any questions you may have. Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, so David did apologize for not being here, and he wanted me to make sure that I reiterated just the great experience that we had working with the ESC. We had 12 subject matter experts, and David and I both sat back and listened to a lot of the discussion that happened around this table, and we learned ourselves. So that tells you what a good ESC this is, because with his experience and my experience, we actually left here learning a lot. So I just wanted to publicly thank those ESC members that dedicated a lot of time. We had a lot of great discussions, particularly trying to define diversion. And there was a lot of focus on pre-arrest diversion, but understanding that there's different tiers of diversion, and having those enlightening conversations and having subject matter experts talking about trauma informed care and how important that is, and all the issues that go into providing a holistic approach to working with kids and families in a diversion setting. And Madam Chair, I just wanted to echo what you had said. I've been on ESCs before as a participant, as a chair or co-chair. I had firsthand get to see the heavy lifting that's done by BSCC staff, which is pretty significant. The phone calls and the draft after draft and the retooling and bringing it back, and I know David suggested a lot of times it's handed off to staff and have them come up with something that's real unique. And so anyway, I saw the heavy lifting, and I agree. A lot of work went into this, and certainly I, for one, really appreciate it, as does David as well.
I'll just make a comment that I think a proposal like this is vital for keeping people, as we had comments earlier today about the prison pipeline and all that, and diverting people away from the criminal justice system. And it's out of this control. My comment is somewhat out of this control of this board, but it'd be nice in future proposals, the state realizes that including transitional age youth is extremely important. So all the way up to 25 years old, whether it be the adult system or the juvenile system, but including those people and diverting them from the justice system.
David, I'm not going to take that personally. Get over this pain.
Sorry about that. Good morning. My name is Luis Angel, and I'm a young father. I am 19 years old, and this budget, this bill or fund what I guess you call it, right? It speaks a lot to me because I was in juvenile hall for a year until a community-based organization stepped into my life and helped me out with my case. And through participatory defense, I was able to be released, reducing 10 years off my sentence, and I was able to be diverted into the program that they had. And if you look at me now, I'm out a year. I came out when my son was 8 years old. I mean, 8 months old. Sorry. And and it's and the beauty of it just speaks about it itself. You know, the trauma informed care that they want, the culturally based that they want to put into these diversion programs. And when I think about it, I think about my nephews that are in the foster care and how they could be, instead of being put into a punishing system, instead of being taken care of the way they should be, you know, by actually informing them about their trauma and teaching them why they act the way they do act or why they have the life that they have. Um, and Sorry, I got kind of like just froze up. Um, I myself was at the state capitol pushing for this fund. You know, I did a Me Too as well, and I just love to see how far it has come now, and now it's being actually put into motion. Um, and when I think about it, I work with a lot of kids that are at risk too, as well as we call them. You know, with Raymond Aguilar, we work with kids that are on probation, and we see the difference. We see when people that are able to mentor them, that been there, done that, that they see the change, that we understand them, they accept us in their, they let us become into their lives because they see that we do care. And when we have community-based organizations that are kind of, you know, pushed by formerly incarcerated people, they see the difference. They see that we don't judge them because I'm surrounded by strong individuals in our agency that always uplift me, that never judge me, that, you know, kind of help me to be a father because I came out with a lot of responsibility. All I had to do was keep my cell clean, eat, you know, follow the rules, and then I come out into this world and now I'm a father and I'm a husband. I have to provide for my family, and it's just the beauty of the nature that a diversion program and the mentorship that they have put in my life that has pushed me this forward. You know, I've been doing a lot of things now within this last year, and and it's not just me, it's thousands other young people that have been in the situations that I have been in. And if we give them the chance and the opportunity to learn and grow, that what they will become, because they're not just throwaway kids. And I'm tired of seeing them being punished. I'm tired of seeing the foster care youth being punished for no reason. And when I committed a crime, they're spending the same time in there as me when they didn't commit no crime. But this just really speaks to me, and I'm very glad to see how far it's come. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Martinez. I've been here previously. I would like to thank each and every one of you for having me here today. I just kind of wanted to sound off as well on a lot of what was mentioned about the grant. You know, I'm a big believer in believing that individuals that have been a part of the problem are closest to the solution. And our youth at times have not given the support that they need or the role models that they need in order to, you know, move forward. A lot of times coming from these inner cities, there's not the proper guidance that's needed to propel our youth in the right direction. I feel that these CBOs, these community-based organizations, have stepped in and fulfilled the role that's often been needed, and that's to give direction to individuals who have often not had it. And as you can see through the percentages in the data, that they are performing a huge task and they are being very successful at it. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for providing the support that's needed and moving this in the right direction. The time is now, and I just want to commend each and every one of you. Thank you very much.
Any further questions or comments from any of the members of the board? Okay, I look then for a motion and a second.
A motion.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, just to clarify on the motion to approve the RFP with the amendment.
Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. And by the way, this is Buck. This is buff. We had a color problem, but I'm okay with it now.
Sorry, mine's
Motion
goldenrod.
is second.
Yeah, yours is goldenrod. Show them, Kimberly.
I
We ran out of goldenrod.
Forgiven. A motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Let the record reflect. Mr. Budnick and Supervisor Perez have recused themselves from this item. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. And I know you're still here because you're going to keep on keeping on.
That's right. Do we have anybody coming back into the room? for this
Item F?
component?
Item F, I would
I-
think so.
I would think so.
Yeah. We have a search party going out.
Search party.
During this lapse, Katie, we're not going to ask you why you're leaving at noon, but you look like you're going to have birthday fun. Birthday fun coming from Katie.
Couple days.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I did.
Again.
Well, they did briefly, but we have to move it as a separate item.
that, yeah.
Oh, we have to go. Because you're also.
Yeah.
Linda, I'm back.
Welcome back. I missed you. Oh, I know. This is kind of, you're going to have to watch the comments and the speakers. We had some amazing speakers while you were gone.
I heard applause. I knew I was missing out.
They're all leaving now. Was it something I said? Okay, I think we're ready to roll.
Okay, great. Well, I will introduce myself again
Wait,
since there.
hold on a minute. Do we have a quorum if ever, okay. Mr. Rotolo has
There is an
lost
absence
his
of a
seat.
quorum, Madam Chair.
There we go. We're
There's a
going.
roll.
Okay, ready, roll. Mr. Rotolo, stay in your seat from here on out. There's really serious consequences to not doing that.
Okay, great. Well, so we're moving on to agenda item F, the Tribal Youth Diversion Program, RFP. For those who are out of the room, my name is Kimberly Bouchard. I'm a field rep in the Corrections Planning and Grant Programs Division. And this next agenda item, or this agenda item, is much like the last one in that we're requesting your approval for the request for proposals and your approval to release the RFP. So in this case, the RFP is the Tribal Youth Diversion Program, which is part of the Youth Reinvestment Grant we talked about in the last agenda item. The Tribal Youth Diversion RFP was developed by the Tribal Advisory Group. The Tribal Advisory Group was selected by the chairs of the Youth Reinvestment Grant ESC for their specific expertise in working with tribal youth and communities. The Tribal Advisory Group served under the YRG Executive Steering Committee, and that ESC has approved the draft RFP that is before you today. The Tribal Advisory Group was chaired by former Office of Native American Affairs Director Olin Jones, and also included 4 other members with broad experience and expertise working with tribal youth and communities. The roster for the Tribal Advisory Group is included in your binders as attachment F2. As with the prior item, I have just a short PowerPoint presentation that I hope, in addition to the agenda report, will give you a good idea of what's included in the RFP and how this grant will be implemented. So at the very highest level, we see here for the Tribal Youth Diversion Program, we have a little over 1.1 million that is specifically dedicated to go to Indian tribes for diversion programs for Indian children. And in this case, the statute directs that those programs must be trauma-informed, community-based, and health-based. The eligible applicants for this particular grant program are federally recognized Indian tribes in California. And with this program, there is no minimum and no maximum amount that can be requested by any one applicant. There are multiple applications that are allowed for any given tribe, and that could include regional applications as well. And in fact, in this case, the advisory group felt that was worthy of receiving preference points. So those proposals that include a consortium of tribes will be awarded preference points. For this grant, the successful applicants will be funded for a total of 3 years, and we are anticipating the start date for those new grants to be July 1st of this year, and they would run through June 30th of 2022. The target population for the Tribal Youth Diversion Program are Indian children who are under 18. We're looking specifically at those that are facing entry to the juvenile justice system or who are in danger of further involvement in that system. And in the case of this grant, we're looking specifically at trying to get this funding into communities where Indian children are experiencing high rates of juvenile arrests, high rates of suicide, high rates of alcohol and substance abuse, and low high school graduation rates. The diversion services for this grant, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, are specifically in the statute required to be trauma-informed, community-based, and health-based. But in consideration of some of the nuances in Indian culture, the advisory group adopted language in the RFP requiring that for the trauma-informed diversion services included under this grant, it must also be sensitive to the issues of historical trauma. And similarly, where we talk about health-based in the context of this grant, it's required that those be grounded in an overall wellness approach that considers the whole person and not just physical health. And that is all I have for you in terms of the slides. So I hope that gives you a good idea of where we're headed with this. And again, I'm just requesting your approval on the RFP and approval to release to the field. Thank you.
I have a
Back-
question, Chair.
yes.
Thank you. How do the tribes know about this opportunity? What's that communication like historically with us and them as to, this is coming out and you should take note or whatever?
Yeah, great question. We really went in the recruitment process for our tribal advisory group. We talked to all those folks about, hey, we really need your help. We don't particularly have a network for this. So they are all queued up to be able to help us get this out into the field. So besides or in addition to our traditional methods of posting on our website and sending out to all the folks that we normally work with and that who have asked to be informed of funding availability, we're also going to be relying heavily on the individuals that we worked with in developing this to help us really reach into the communities that we might not otherwise have access to.
Madam Chair, can I just add to that? The individuals that served on the tribal work group we had reached out to a number of folks, but not everybody was able to commit to the dates of the meetings.
Sure.
So not only do we have the people that actually served on the work group, we have a network of other folks that we've reached out to too that also know about this opportunity. So I'm assuming, Kim, that we'll not only get the word out through the work group, but we'll also recontact those folks that we initially contacted about their interest about participating and then get the word out even more.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any further from the board, I should ask? Anything from the public on this item? Yes. You just tell me you didn't fill out a speaker's card.
I thought I followed the
I think I'm just going to go with complete failure today. I'm going to be really strict in the April meeting. Everybody get ready.
Double down. I'm usually a lot better about it. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I forgive you.
I'm Renee. I'm with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice in San Francisco. Just something that came up for me as we're discussing the youth reinvestment grant and all the wonderful work that's been done by the ESC and the work group. Something that I just want to acknowledge in the challenges for this tribal work group was that the conflict of interest issue posed a lot of barriers to members of the tribal community. For example, and this of course is anecdotal, but I was speaking just the other day with one of CJCJ's Next Generation Fellows. These are formerly incarcerated and justice impacted individuals who are training in policy advocacy. And one of our fellows who's deeply embedded in the tribal community and I think had a similar challenge to many who applied was that the families are huge, the communities are interconnected, and the conflict of interest as it stands posed a lot of barriers. So I hope that we have more outreach to tribal communities in the future, but I also hope that we can move forward in some way that would broaden the reach for folks who are interested. So thank you.
Point. Thank you. All right. Seeing nothing else from the audience, I would then move back to the board looking for a motion and a second. And all in favor of approving this recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? No one. This is remarkable. Thank you, Kimberly, for all your hard work.
Good job, Kim.
Now, procedurally, aside from the fact that we are 1 minute before Executive Director Howard has to leave, and that's how we roll here at the BSCC, may I ask for any final public comment before we adjourn for the legal portion of this, or is that procedurally not allowed? Okay. I'm gonna, so you don't have to wait for our report out. If there's anyone at this point prior to adjourning the meeting that would like to make a public comment on any item in any way, any shape, form, unless of course it's about, my personal demeanor, I would invite you forward. Seeing none, I will thank and excuse the audience. I will ask all the recording equipment and live streaming to be discontinued. And do we clear staff out of the room also?
Yes, please.
Staff.
And if I may, Madam Chair, point of personal privilege before I leave, those were terrific presentations today, just extra wonderful in terms of the depth and detail. And I just want to thank our team one more time.
Well, but can I reflect on the fact that you said, may I, and didn't wait for my response and then just went ahead and did it?
As usual.
Yet again, a reflection of my lack of leadership today.
Oh, I hope that wasn't on the record.
Thank you. I'd like to adjourn this meeting and thank you all for attending.
Dude, that was a great adjournment.
Thanks, everyone.
You too, buddy.